Welcome to the Small Business Sisterhood podcast. I'm your host, Pepper Makepeace, an online business strategist for female solopreneurs and side hustlers, and the founder of the Small Business Sisterhood, an online membership community serving small business owners in the first stages of business. Join me as I go behind the scenes with female entrepreneurs, revealing the struggles, strategies, and inspiring stories of these amazing women. If you're interested in connecting with like-minded women in a supportive online community that helps you stay focused, motivated, and accountable as you build your business, check us out at smallbusinesssisterhood.com. Today we're talking to Sagan Morrow. Sagan teaches busy, time-crunch solopreneurs how to build their own successful, home-based businesses without the overwhelm. She specializes in productivity tips and action-oriented strategic planning for multi-passionate creatives. Sagan has over a decade of experience as a freelance writer and editor and hosts the Indie Author Weekly podcast. When she isn't teaching solopreneurs or doing freelance work for her own clients, Sagan writes romance novels. Well, thank you so much, Sagan, for being on the podcast. I'm really excited to talk with you today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell everybody a little bit about you and your business.
Sure. So I'm a productivity strategist at saganmorrow.com. So I teach people how to improve their time management and become much more efficient and how to really get a lot more done in far less time without feeling burned out and overwhelmed. I tend to work with a lot of solopreneurs as well as multi-passionate creatives. I myself am very multi-passionate, so really helping people not feel like they need to be pigeonholed in one particular niche, but having the opportunity to do all of the things that they really want to do and do all of them really well. That is what my business is all about.
Yeah, and without feeling overwhelmed, right? Like that's the key. That's the magic of you.
Yes. Overwhelm is such a problem for so many people. So it's really nice to be able to help people with that.
So tell me a little bit about some of the strategies that you use with people. I know that a lot of us first starting out are solopreneurs. A lot of us that are drawn to being an entrepreneur are multi-passionate. So I imagine that a lot of your clients are kind of crossovers with that as well. So tell me how that works. Like what do we do?
Yeah. So the number one thing to really start out with is really having a solid understanding of what you truly want for your life, right? So I actually always get my clients to really start from that point. And it's interesting how often that's a really tricky question to ask, right? Because we often don't really think about what we truly want out of our lives. But when we go through the process of really sitting down and turning inwards and understanding what we most want, then we can ensure that we are actually constructing our business in such a way that it reflects what we want. Too often we end up creating these businesses that are we're sort of copying and pasting what we're seeing other people do because it works really well for them. So we assume it'll work well for us. We sort of use this kind of cookie cutter method. But the problem is that every person is unique and every business is different. So really understanding what you want from your life and then being able to figure out how can my professional life support all of my personal goals and interests. That's kind of where the magic can really come into play.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And it was a learning curve for me when I first started out. I think I went through that process myself. You know, it was 2008 when I first started my business, and I didn't have a lot of entrepreneurs around me. I didn't really know anybody else that was doing it. It was very early days trying to make connections online, trying to figure out how to set up my business and realizing I don't really want to be working that much, or I don't want to be doing the things that they're like, what I can find is telling me that I should be doing, or doing it like I was in my 9-to-5. Like, that's not why I'm in this. I don't want to do it like that. So it was, for me, a process of trial and error, trying to figure out like, wait a minute, this kind of sucks. Like, what do I do? How do I rethink this?
Yes, absolutely. And experimentation is such a great thing to do, right? Because we don't really know unless we've given
Yeah.
something a try. So that can be so, so helpful. But yeah, I was in the exact same boat as you when I started out also in 2008, right? Like, didn't know anyone else who was in the industry. I didn't really know what I was doing with my business. And you just kind of go out there and you realize how much there is to learn. And you end up making a
Yeah.
lot of mistakes if you don't get guidance from someone else, right?
Yeah, but you learn a lot in the process, right? That's why we're here to help new people not do what we did, right?
Yeah, yes, exactly. Because there isn't any sense in reinventing the wheel, right?
Yeah,
It's
totally.
so important to be able to learn from other people's experience and then to be able to adapt it, which is what I
Yeah.
love doing with all of my clients. Like, and what I love doing with my own business is, getting the inspiration and ideas from what we kind of see in the world around us and getting guidance from people who have been doing this for longer than we have, and then adapting everything to really customize it and personalize it to our unique situation. There's
Yeah.
so much beauty in that.
Well, and I love that too because it's not you're not committing to something and then you're stuck in this thing that you don't that's great for now, but then maybe you have children or your children grow up or your children are homeschooling some suddenly like we did this year and suddenly you have to shift everything. It's that adaptability is a big key, I would think.
Yes. And I mean, we're human beings, right? Like, we do grow and change, and
Yeah.
our businesses need to reflect that. I mean, when I see that people haven't changed their business plan in the last 3 years, I'm like, okay, that's where we need to start, because so much happens, right? And especially this year with the pandemic, we realized how much can change. So making sure that we are pivoting and not putting things where it's like, okay, this is now set in stone. This is what I'm doing with my life. This is my goal. I mean, no, everything changes, and being able to adapt to that and being flexible with it is so good.
Do you think that that's unique to being an entrepreneur, that it's a little more it's a little less, you have a 9 to 5 and you're there until either you quit or they fire you and, it's kind of the same thing all the time versus being an entrepreneur, it's so much more your terms and flexible with what you want. Like, do you think that that's kind of a different mindset that we have to adapt when we start our own business?
Yes, I do. I totally think that, and I think that it's also um, it's a very difficult thing to start to get used to, that way of thinking, right? Because we really are, in our society, we are taught this is what we are supposed to do with our lives. This is what we are supposed to do with our personal lives and our professional lives. This is the socially acceptable sort of way to do things. And when we sort of start to step out of that, we realize that we can make our own rules, right? And
Right.
create a life and a business that works really well for us, even if it's maybe a little bit different than what other people are kind of doing. I think that some people who are drawn to that sort of entrepreneurial mindset, I think that some of them do just sort of naturally have that way of viewing things. And I think as well that it can be cultivated, right? It absolutely can be cultivated, where we have to sort of get into that new, fresh way of thinking of, okay, I have complete control. So what do I truly want?
It's so powerful and a little overwhelming at first, I think, but, I think I mean, that's why I'm in it, right? Is that I get to choose what I'm doing and how I do it, and that's really what drew me to it. Tell me a little bit more about the multi-passionate part of your business. Like, I know that you have several projects going, and you show up fully in all of them, and I'm so impressed with that, and I wanna know the secret to that.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, when I started my business, I was actually a health blogger at the time, and I did a lot of writing. I started out with freelancing around like sort of in the health and wellness industry,
Mm,
and then I pivoted from there, and I started doing some editing for clients and some social media. And I really found that there was so many different things that I wanted to be doing, and the only way that I could kind of do all these different things or experiment with them, play with them, was by starting to get pretty good at managing time really well. And so my
mhm.
business has really pivoted a lot over the years. So at this point, I started teaching other people how to start their own freelance businesses 5 or 6 years ago, I think it was. And then from there, 4 or 5 years ago, something like that. And then from there, I started, I was creating courses and I was helping people create their own businesses and really get started with freelancing. And then while I was still doing freelance work myself, and then I started more recently in the last couple of years writing romantic comedy novels. And so that's been a lot of fun. I've written 7 in the past 2 years. I'm currently working on my 8th right now, which is pretty exciting. And I also started my Indie Author Weekly podcast along the way to share about that writing journey. So for me, it's really all about, putting these pieces together. There's so many things that I want to be doing. So I keep adding to my business whenever I get excited about a new project.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you're alone in that. I think a lot of us have different things, and sometimes it's not super clear how to kind of incorporate all of them and make the time for different things. And so what would you recommend to somebody that, I think first starting out, what would you recommend, somebody focus on one thing when first starting and then kind of adding things as you go along, or what would you advise?
Yeah, so I would really recommend that you start by doing a sort of a business planning retreat kind of thing. Do it by yourself. It can be totally solo, but really go through that whole process of figuring out, if all other things were equal, what are all the things that I would be doing, right? So you're sort of taking all of those ideas swirling around in your head and you're getting them out of your head and onto paper. And then from there, you can really start looking at, how do these threads connect, right? Can I connect the dots between these different things? For example, the way that I teach productivity and the way that I do my freelance work, it is all about this whole concept around making your own rules, doing it in a way that can be customized to you. And that's also the underlying theme of my romantic comedy novels. It's about, creating this life that is right for you, even if it's not something that is the norm. So all the different components of my business have this sort of same umbrella theme that connects the dots. So I'd really encourage you, if you are running a multi-passionate business, to figure out, there is going to be some kind of connective thread. There's a reason why you are drawn to multiple different things, and there's going to be at least one thing that connects the dots. So once you can do that, then you can really start planning out what your year kind of looks like. What do you want to start with first? Because you can't do it all at once right away. Right? You do kind of need to start with some things that you don't get too overwhelmed. That doesn't mean that you can't add more things very quickly, but starting with one thing, maybe starting with the thing that is going to bring in the most money, since you are a business, right? So you actually need to be bringing in money. The thing that's maybe the easiest to start with, the thing that brings you the most joy, right? So kind of going through these, assessing them, and seeing, is there one particular piece that would be a good starting point? That's kind of the easiest and the fastest way to make money, while figuring out what I can do on the side, and then adding it in 2 months from now, right? That's kind of a good way to do it, because you do want to be very focused and very clear with what you are doing when you have a lot of different passions.
Yeah, I love that. How do you know when it's an okay time to add in another thing?
I would say that that it is time, that it's an okay time to add in something new when you are feeling energized, right? When you don't have that sort of overwhelm that's making you feel really stuck and that you can't move forward. When you're really curious and interested to start something new, and there's already a nice foundation of the thing that you started with previously. I find that for myself and for my clients, the energy piece is a really, really big one. So really looking at, if I'm feeling exhausted all of the time, then that's probably a sign that it's not a good time for me to add something new, right? But if I'm waking up in the morning feeling energized, excited about the workday as a general rule, and being able to get through the workday without feeling burned out and overwhelmed and that kind of thing, then that's a good sign that, yeah, okay, let's try something. Let's try adding something in. I would also say that sometimes we get excited about a new idea. And especially, when we are multi-passionate, we have so many ideas. So we get excited about something and we might try it, and we might try it for a little while and then realize, actually, this isn't a good fit because it's not giving me energy, and it's just causing me a lot of stress and anxiety. And I've been experimenting with a few different things and none of it's working. And in that case, maybe that means it's time to let go of that. Maybe it should be more of a hobby than a business, right? Maybe you were excited about one particular element of it, but all of these other pieces that are required for it really don't appeal to you. So checking in with yourself on that kind of regular basis can be so helpful.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Because I do believe that not all hobbies should become businesses. And sometimes it's okay and it's more fun if they don't. And I'm speaking from personal experience that, that hobby as a business isn't satisfying to me. There's that time when it's just like, that's not fun anymore because now it's about, am I making money at it or not? Instead of it just being the joy of doing whatever it was. So I love that, the idea of checking in and making sure that it's actually a good fit for your business.
Yeah, yeah. And also like really looking at asking yourself, why do I want this to be part of my business? Right? Like why do I really want that? And because then you can sort of start to differentiate, oh, actually, I just want it to be part of my business because I enjoy it, not because I legitimately want to make money from it, right? I just like doing it. Or maybe it should remain a hobby. And once you have a really good foundation with bringing in an income from one thing, that also gives you so much more space and flexibility to really play around with something that might kind of be a hobby that you really want to turn into more of your business, right? Like my income really doesn't come from my romantic comedy novels, right? Like the amount of time and money that I put into them, it doesn't tend to translate into it doesn't really balance out at this stage. I make my money from the other facets of my business, and that allows me to have the space to experiment a lot with my romantic comedies, with writing them, with marketing and different things like that. So I'll try strategy and I'll see, okay, well, that worked all right in this sense, but I need to play around with it a lot more. And that also takes the stress off of it a lot because I know that I'm still making money from other aspects of my business. So that's a good piece to consider when you're adding something new. If you really want it to be a long-term part of your business, how can you create the space so that it doesn't need to make money immediately?
Yeah, I like that. That's really good advice. How do you manage? There's two questions, big questions when I come across these really successful multi-passionate businesses like yours, where I want to know like how do you answer the question, what do you do? That's my first question. My second question is from like an email audience perspective, do you keep everything separate or do you have different lists for different businesses? Those are very different questions, so I should have just asked one at a time. But let's start with how do you answer the question, what do you do?
It's hard. It is something that I have wrestled with many times over the years. I tend to talk about what I do in a different way depending on who I'm talking to. So I have in my business plan, I actually have two different bios, two or three different bios that highlight a different angle of what my business is about. And I kind of use those as my elevator pitch, depending on the situation that I'm in. So, depending on who I'm talking to and the audience and that kind of thing, I might really focus a lot more on one aspect of my business versus another. But I do tend to sort of go for that kind of knowing what the umbrella theme is of my business. That can be really helpful again, right? Because then I can say, yes, I'm a productivity strategist and a romance novelist, which, it can work pretty well that way. But usually I like to tailor it depending on who I'm talking to.
I love that. That's a very good answer. Thank you. I know that especially when we're first starting out, it's hard to even talk about one aspect of our business. And so being able to effectively and eloquently talk about multiple aspects of our businesses, it can be challenging. So I really like the idea of really thinking about the audience and being prepared for, in this situation, I focus on these things. And in this situation, I'll focus on these things. I love kind of that framework that you've set for yourself and how to talk about that. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's always important to know like what your sort of purpose is, right? Anytime that you're talking with anyone, no matter how casual it might be, what is the real ultimate sort of goal or purpose of this? And what's going to help them the most in that kind of thing?
Yeah. So my second question, how do you manage it from an email subscriber list perspective inside your business? How do you manage those different pieces of the back end of your business?
Yeah, so I use ConvertKit for my email marketing, and I am really, really big into emails. It's like one of I was going to say it's one of my favorite parts of my business. I have so many different favorite parts of my business, so that's like quite a big tier. But it is like an activity that I truly love doing. I send an email every Saturday morning that sort of shares the business lesson that I learned that week, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those emails I send to one audience. That is like my productivity audience, my business audience. I send another email every Tuesday to my book readers and my podcast listeners, because the book readers and the podcast listeners are kind of the same audience, because my podcast is all about writing books. So that's kind of how I differentiate them. Occasionally, I will talk about the books in my productivity email. And usually it'll be something such as, like, this was an experience that I had with writing a book. This was a thing that I was sort of struggling with. Here's how it applies to your situation, right? Like sort of bringing it back. And the same with the productivity when it comes to the book side of things. Like I've done podcast episodes all about, how to schedule your time when you're writing a book. So it can link together. Everything can kind of work in conjunction, but I do see them as separate audiences in the back end of my email list for sure.
That makes sense. Do you have everything housed under one website?
Yes. That's been interesting, because I've had my website since 2008, and I was really big into health blogging, right? So then it morphed, and then it became, I had a health blog and a communications blog and a fashion blog, and then I combined them all together, and then I pulled out, the main sort of piece as a business blog, and then I added the books to it. So my website is it's a little bit messy. It has like so many years of content that has been added over the years it's not that some of it from way back when isn't as relevant anymore. But I've really worked to ensure that the navigation on my website is all about, here's the business courses, here are the books, romance novels and business books, here is the podcast, here is how we can work together, right? So really factoring them all out. But I definitely find that it's easier for me if everything is in one space. And I also find that it's actually easier. The interesting thing here, it's actually easier for my clients and for my audience, because a lot of people tend to be interested in a variety of things, especially because I work with multi-passionates, right? And, a lot of people, if they are interested in the book side of things, they're kind of interested about how does it work that you can write these books over when you're doing all these other sort of components of your business. So it all fits together really nicely. And in that sense, I feel like it makes a lot more sense for everything to be housed under one website.
Yeah, I would agree. That makes sense. How long did it take you to figure out how to piece it together? Like, what was your process I know you talk about the thread but like just the logistics of it all, I think from even when I first started, and my website from 2008 is my peppermakepeace.com, where I talk about, web design and all things tech stuff. And Small Business Sisterhood is a separate site now. But I have gone back and forth about, are they combined? Like, do I separate them? How do I do that? Because the 2008 site, Google loves it because it's got, it's been around a long time and I've got a lot of traffic there. So I don't want to just dismiss it altogether. And, the work that I do there still applies. So it's like the logistics of it has almost always confused me and how I structure all of those things. I'd love to hear your process of like the logistics.
Yeah, I definitely think it depends on how your brain works, right? And it depends on what feels like it makes the most sense to you. Because like for me, I'm amazed when people can have like 5 different Instagram accounts for different aspects of their business and their personal life. I'm just like, oh, I can't, no, like my brain can't handle that. It's too many,
Right.
it's too many separated pieces. I like housing things under one thing because my brain is just happier with it. So that's an important element to like know how your brain works. But in terms of the logistics around it, it's something that has just kind of evolved and unfolded over time. As I've added different pieces to my business, I really feel like my website and my business plan, these are like organic living types of things. So they're constantly changing. And so I didn't really do a huge overhaul at any one point to be like, okay, this is now how this is going to be structured. Instead, I mean, besides sort of pulling out the business component as my main website, because I knew that I wasn't going to be blogging about health and fashion and stuff like that. So I put all of that onto a separate website. So that still exists. It's just an archived site. But I really found that like because of the different things that I'm doing right now with my business, it just made sense to play with it over time. So I've really, I would have the main business site, and then after a while, when I was like, now my podcast is something that I want to, I'm clearly doing now. Like it was something I was sort of playing with and experimenting with early on, and then I was like, all right, no, this is now a foundational part of my business. So then I added it to the navigation bar of my website, right? So I'll play around with little pieces here and there, and I'll just make small adjustments. And I find that can sometimes be the most helpful thing to do, because then you're really giving yourself that opportunity to experiment and sort of seeing, okay, what's sticking and what's not. And it does go back again to doing that sort of like business planning retreat sort of thing, where you're really figuring out what are my actual goals and priorities? How am I going to get there? What do I really want to focus on? And then piecing them all together.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, I love it. So we talked a little bit about, adding new things in, but once you have the established kind of pieces of, multiple pieces of your business, how do you then determine from a productivity standpoint how and when to work on different things?
Yeah, so that's something that can be so challenging, right? This is one of the biggest things that can be so challenging for multi-passionates. But really looking at what are, once you have sort of your longer term goals, priorities that you want to be working on, then really breaking it down, right? So I like to do things on sort of like a quarterly basis and try to figure out, okay, how exactly does this fit into my schedule? So, I mean, right now, looking ahead to the upcoming year, really looking at, okay, here are the things that I want to do in my business. These are, do I want to create another course? Do I want to, how many more books do I want to write? Sort of figuring out, okay, these are all the things that I want to do this year. And then piecing out what makes the most sense in terms of how long I know it takes me to do different aspects of my business, right? What are sort of the approximate amounts of time? Because I time track everything. I highly recommend doing it, especially if you're multi-passionate. I time track everything. So I know how long it takes me to write a book. I know how long it takes me to do a book launch. And also factoring in what things take more energy versus less energy. So I know that, some elements of my business, the marketing side, are that doesn't energize me as much, right? I'm a very introverted person. I'm like very like creative sort of oriented. So when I'm creating things, that really energizes me. And so I know that will give me more energy. But I know that if I'm, trying to do a bunch of marketing, then I'm not going to have as much energy for the rest of the day, right? So once you factor in those types of things, then you can really understand how your task schedule should look, because then you can really block out, okay, I know that this is going to take me, it might only take me an hour, but I'm going to need recovery time afterwards.
Right.
So I can't
Yeah.
plan to do a bunch of other tasks that day because this is going to be a heavier energy for me. So when you think about those types of elements, you can really plan ahead and you can really block in exactly where things fit into your schedule. And you also might want to do things. I mean, it's again, it's different for every person. It depends on your personal productivity style and the way that your brain works. But you can do things like having like 2-week time blocks where you're like, okay, I know that it will take me 2 weeks to like work on this particular project. So that is going to be my main focus at this point. I mean, when I was doing my last book launch in August, I had planned ahead. I knew that it was going to take like a lot of my time and my energy. So I planned ahead and I got a whole bunch of my other work done in advance so that August could really be a month where I was focusing specifically on that aspect of my book. So understanding, again, it comes back to what we were saying earlier about you can't do everything all at once right away, right? You do want to have some fluctuation in what you're focusing on at different sorts of things. So you're not trying to keep everything going all at the exact same time with the exact same amount of energy for it.
I love that energy piece of that. And, it's so just to kind of reiterate what you were saying, looking at that, how long it takes to do certain tasks, but also looking at, and this is a part that really, I think a lot of people don't think about, is that the energy that it takes to do those things and the recovery time that is necessary oftentimes after that. I think that that's such an amazing kind of insight from you about how to look at productivity, because it isn't just about the time. It's about how we feel afterwards or during or before. And that really plays into how much we can actually get done in any given amount of time. So I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the way that I approach productivity is that, toxic productivity is not real productivity, because when it gets to the point of toxic, then you're no longer being productive. You're no longer being efficient, right? You're no longer making good use of your time. So it's really about ensuring that self-care is so important. It's really the foundation of doing all these things. So you do have that energy. And because, why spend 3 hours trying to work on something when your energy is low, when you're feeling tired, when you're not producing as good of quality, as opposed to giving yourself that space, that rest, and then approaching it from an angle of, yeah, I'm feeling good. I'm excited to work on this now. You can do it in half the time, a fifth of the time, and produce higher quality work than if you were feeling exhausted and burned out.
Yeah, such a good point. Such a good way to look at it, and such a great way to not get burnt out. Like you said, I know that that's a big piece of your business, is if we consistently force ourselves to do the tasks at the times when we're not feeling it and we just feel like we're forcing it, and it's exhausting and it's no fun. And at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, I got stuff done, but if I kind of feel crappy now. So that didn't really, I don't feel fulfilled after that. So
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I love that. Thank you. And so many beautiful gems from you about productivity and multi-passionate business. I love it. I love it so much. So the question I always ask everybody is having you think back to when you first started. And I love that we both started around the same time, because it's like, it was such a special time back in 2008. It was like a whole different world back then. So tell me, like, anything that was particularly surprising or challenging, when you were first getting started.
Yeah, I feel like when I was first getting started, really the biggest thing that I found to be really challenging was that I just didn't know what I was doing, right? Like I just kind of went into it because I was like, well, this is like I almost fell into it. And sometimes we just fall into these types of things. And what the big sort of mistake that I made at the time was that I wasn't balancing out planning with taking action. And this is a really big problem, I think, for a lot of people when they're just starting out. We're so excited, which is great. So we might be taking a lot of action. Or, we might be kind of scared about everything. So we spend all of our time planning and then we never actually implement those plans. So
Right.
being very strategic about it is so, so important. And I mean, for myself, I've definitely, I think we all, go from one end of the scale to the other, where we tend to be a little bit more of a planner, and then we go too far in the other direction, and then we're just taking all this action. And it can be such a problem, because if we're just planning constantly, then we never actually make progress with our businesses. And if we just keep on taking action without strategically planning, then we're going to make a lot of mistakes, right?
Yeah.
And then it's going to be that much harder to get back on track with things.
And to have a business that is really what you want it to be and not just kind of an accident.
Yes, exactly. That's such an important piece, because it's so easy to fall into a particular type of thing with our business. And if we don't, and with our lives, right, with our personal lives too. And if we don't really check in with ourselves and say, does this make me happy? Am I actually, and it not about, not because there's a global pandemic going on, right? Not because I'm having a bad week or whatever, but am I actually enjoying this on a routine basis? And if we're not, then that's a really good sign that we need to change. I mean, that's when, I was side hustling for quite a few years in the beginning. And that's when I quit my day job, was because I realized an entire month had gone by and I woke up every single morning dreading that I had to go to work. And I was like, that is not a good ratio, right? You shouldn't spend more time not looking forward to your work than you are excited about it. And that really applies in our businesses too. When you're not excited about something for a long period of time, it might be time to pivot and do something different.
Absolutely. Wonderful points and wonderful insight. Thank you so much, Sagan. It's been so much fun talking to you, and I've learned so much from you in a very short amount of time. So thank you so much for sharing all of your experience and your knowledge, and it's been really fun having you on the podcast. So tell everybody your favorite place to hang out online.
Instagram. I spend a lot of time on Instagram, so that's always a good place to find me. I spend some time on Twitter too, but it's mostly Instagram. So you can find me at Sagan Lives.
Awesome. And I will be sure to include that in the show notes, and as well as your website. And thank you again. It's been so much fun talking to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Sagan, for talking with us today. You can find out more information about Sagan and the link to her website and the show notes for this episode at smallbusinesssisterhood.com/29. I hope you found this episode useful and inspiring. If you did, please pop over to iTunes and leave a review. Thanks for listening. Catch you next time.